I've driven enough miles to map the lower 48 on the inside of my eyelids, but that night, the desert felt bigger than the country. The road out of Santa Rosa folded into a dark ribbon, and my rig, 30 tons of diesel heartbeat and chrome, was the only thing alive for miles. I'm 58, too old to spook, too stubborn to admit when I am. Yet I remember a thin wind slipping across the asphalt like it had a mind, the kind that lifts grit into little spirals and makes a man feel watched. The company dispatcher had me running a late drop to El Paso. It was a clean run, dry sky, new tires, coffee in a steel thermos, and a talk radio station fading in and out like a ghost with stage fright. The dash clock read 12:17 a.m. when the reception died completely. Just static, then a soft tone I couldn't place, like the sound a wine glass makes when you thumb the rim. I rolled the volume down and cracked the window. Warm desert air came in smelling of dust and creosote, the scent of old rain and older rock. Out past the shoulder, the land was all scrub and shadow. The moon was a silver bruise behind thin cloud, bright enough to make silhouettes, but not enough to comfort anyone. I kept my eyes on the center line. Driving at night is an act of faith. You throw yourself forward into what you can't see and trust the road is still there when the beams arrive. That's when my high beams picked out a shape standing on the gravel, maybe 50 yards ahead, tall, thin, still. I eased off the throttle, not braking hard. Animals spook, people run. And a driver who's lived this long learns to approach the unknown like it's a skittish horse. The figure stayed perfectly motionless, no thumb out, no wave, no step back from the edge as 80,000 pounds of steel hummed toward him. My heart gave one heavy knock. I downshifted and tapped the air brakes. The rig exhaled in a slow, patient sigh. He was a man, at least that's what my eyes insisted. Rags for clothes, or maybe clothes so torn they'd earned the name. Bare forearms, pale under the moon like unpolished bone. Hair cropped short, either white blonde or just bleached by dust and moonlight. But it was the eyes that stopped me. The color not blue or gray exactly, but the color of a thin sheet of ice over dark water. Even from the cab, I felt them land on me the way a hand lands on a shoulder. Calm, certain. I flipped on the hazards and brought the Peterbilt to a gentle stop, nose just past him so my mirrors and instinct agreed I had the advantage. I don't pick up hitchhikers as a rule. My rules have kept me alive, but if you spend your life on the blacktop, you also learn there are nights when the road asks something of you. I leaned across and cranked the passenger window down. "You all right there, friend?" I called. He didn't answer right away. The night filled that space with the tick of hot metal cooling and the faint electrical hum of the dash. He tilted his head, curious, like he was listening to a language he hadn't heard in a while. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and even. No accent I knew. "I'm trying to get home." "Where's home?" I asked. He looked past me, through the windshield, over the hood, as if home was not a dot on any map I carried. "Far," he said. Then he smiled, small and careful, the polite smile of a man asking a favor he believes you'll grant. "May I ride with you a while?" I've turned down 100 rides for less, but there was something in the way the air felt. Heavier, as if the cab had dropped a few feet on its springs. My fingers were steady on the wheel, yet a prickle worked up the back of my neck like a line of ants. I unlocked the passenger door. "Okay," I said, "just a while." He opened the door without the clumsy yank of a first-timer. He climbed up smooth, folded himself into the seat, and shut the door so gently the latch barely clicked. Up close, his skin wasn't pale so much as reflective. Not shiny, not wet. Just a quality like moonlight had chosen him and couldn't let go. He smelled faintly of metal cooled in rain. "Name's Jack," I said, "because manners are the bridge over every strange ravine." He considered that, then nodded. "Jack," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "Thank you." I put her in gear and rolled us back onto the highway. The hazards blinked off. The world narrowed again to the asphalt and the twin cones of light. The dash clock read 12:17 a.m. still. I frowned, tapped the glass. It didn't budge. Maybe the mechanism was stuck. Maybe time was. For a mile we rode without speaking. The radio, unbidden, woke itself in a whisper of static, the wine-glass tone threading through it like a needle. The man turned to the window, watching the dark like it was full of familiar landmarks. "It's beautiful," he said. "What is?" I asked. "The breathing," he said. "The way your desert breathes at night." Out past the guardrail, the wind ran fingers through the sage and the land exhaled. I tried to laugh, but it died halfway up my throat. I told myself I'd stop at the next truck stop for a refill, some pie, the brightness of other humans. I told myself this was just a man in trouble. I've told myself worse things to keep the engine humming, but the truth sat with us in the cab like a third passenger. The road had asked something of me, and I had said yes, and somewhere between the center line and the moon, the night had answered back. The desert has a way of swallowing sound. Once we were rolling again, the tires hummed a steady rhythm against the asphalt, but everything else, the wind, the engine's rumble, even the faint rattle of the trailer, seemed to fade into some quieter frequency. The man beside me sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap like he was meditating, no fidgeting, no breathing I could hear. Just silence. I tried to focus on the road, but my eyes kept sliding toward him. The light from the dash brushed across his face in green and amber, and it hit me that he didn't blink, not once. I counted. 30 seconds, 40, a full minute, nothing. Then, finally, a slow, deliberate blink, like he remembered it was something he was supposed to do. "You from around here?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. He turned toward me, calm as a cloud drifting. "No, not here." That voice again, too soft for the cab, yet I heard every word like it was spoken right beside my ear. It carried a hum, faint, metallic, like an old tape recording of someone speaking through a fan. "What were you doing out there?" I asked. "There's not a damn thing for 50 miles. "I was waiting," he said. "For what?" "For someone who would stop." I felt that one in my gut. I tightened my grip on the wheel and forced a laugh. "Well, guess I'm just that kind of fool." He smiled again, but it wasn't mockery. It was gratitude, or maybe recognition. That smile made the hair rise on my arms. We passed a faded sign for Vaughan, 35 miles. I should have been relieved to see civilization within reach, but the numbers didn't comfort me. My clock still read 12:17 a.m. It hadn't moved since he climbed in. I checked my wristwatch. Dead. The little second hand hung there like it had lost its will to live. The radio crackled. A thread of static pulled tight, then loosened into what sounded like a voice buried under water. You remember." The man turned the knob gently, though I hadn't seen him move his hand. The sound cut off. "Must be the signal," I muttered. He tilted his head. "It's not the signal." The way he said it made my skin tighten. I looked at him, really looked, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. His pupils weren't round. They were thin, vertical slits that widened and narrowed, adjusting to the light from the dash like an aperture on a camera. When the truck hit a dip and the beams bounced, his pupils flashed silver. I blinked hard, told myself I was seeing reflections. Long drives play tricks on your eyes. But then he spoke again, and the air in the cab felt charged. "You've been here before, Jack." "Excuse me? This road, this night." He turned toward the windshield, voice low but steady. "You helped one of us once." My hands went cold. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words jammed in my throat. "Somewhere deep in memory, I saw a different night. Same highway, same desert decades ago. I'd been 20, maybe 21. There'd been a crash, a bright flash of blue light in the sky. A figure crawling from the wreckage that wasn't like any man I'd ever seen. I shook my head hard, like I could rattle the thought loose. "You're talking nonsense." "Maybe," he said. "Maybe I am." Then he smiled again, and for an instant his teeth caught the light, not white, but faintly translucent like glass. I wanted to pull over, to throw him out and gun it to the next town, but the highway ahead had turned unfamiliar. The mile markers were gone. The asphalt gleamed with a faint blue shimmer, like frost under moonlight. My GPS screen blinked to static. "What the hell is happening?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just looked out the window and said, almost to himself, "Sometimes home finds you first." I don't know what made me glance at the dash then, but when I did, every gauge needle sat dead center, RPM, temperature, fuel, all of them perfectly aligned. Frozen. The hum in the air grew louder, filling the cab like invisible wind. I pressed the brakes. The pedal sank to the floor, unresisting. No slowing, no change in the hum of the tires. The desert outside glowed faintly blue, horizon to horizon. The man turned to me, calm as ever. "Don't be afraid," he said. "It's almost over." And just like that, the world went silent. The headlights cut out. The engine died. The wheels still turned, but the road had vanished. We were moving through light, thick, cold, and endless. That was the moment I realized he wasn't lost at all. He was leading me somewhere. I've had close calls in snow and rain, jackknifes and blowouts, even a microburst outside Amarillo that shoved my trailer sideways like a toy. None of that felt like this. This was quiet, dense, unnatural, like we'd slipped under a lake made of cold light. The cab was a dim capsule. The windshield no longer showed road, only a soft blue that moved without moving. I couldn't hear the engine because there was no engine to hear. I couldn't feel the rumble because there was no asphalt to transmit it. The only sound was the faintest hum, a singing wire stretched across the night. The man beside me, if he was a man, watched the glow like a homesick traveler looks out a train window. His profile was carved from moonlight. I realized I was gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I let go and flexed my fingers. They tingled, like waking from pins and needles sleep. "You said I've been here before," I managed. "Explain." He didn't turn. "You were 21, County Road outside Roswell. Your first solo haul in a borrowed cab that leaked oil and hope. The radio died at 2:13 a.m. You told yourself it was the fuse." My mouth went dry. My first solo. I remembered the owner-operator who trusted me with a short hop, how I'd treated that old Freightliner like a sacred relic. I remembered the fuse, actually pulling the panel and squinting at it under a penlight while the desert breathed around me. But what I remembered next had never made sense enough to keep. "There was a flash," I heard myself say. "Blue-white, like lightning without thunder." He nodded. "You smelled burned sage and wet metal. You thought someone had fired a flare." I swallowed. A picture formed, the ditch beyond the barbed wire, the shape of twisted something that shouldn't have been flying. My boots in dust, my heart in my throat, and a figure crawling, no, unfolding, out of that broken thing like a moth from a cocoon. It was small, I said, not a child, not an adult, skin the color of old paper, eyes too big. "Afraid," he said, "hurt." I saw my younger self, clumsy with adrenaline, clutching a rag from the cab, reaching out the way you reach toward a dog that might bite or collapse. The not-child flinched, then leaned toward the cloth as if the idea of help was a language it could almost understand. "I put it in the cab," I whispered, shocked at my own memory. "Wrapped in my jacket. It was cold to the touch, like a battery left outside in winter." "You gave it water from your thermos," he said. "It didn't drink. It held the cap in both hands and listened to the sound." My breath stuttered. That detail. Who could invent that? For years, when I tried to recall the night, It came as a smell, a pressure, a song without words. I had told myself it was dream residue, the way the brain files nonsense. But the song was real, a thin harmonic between the world I knew and the one I didn't. "What happened then?" I asked, though the question trembled with an answer I feared. "You drove," he said simply. "You chose movement over fear. And when the lights came, you didn't run." The lights, not headlights, not aircraft. Spheres the size of hay bales drifting over the Joshua trees, shedding that same unearthly blue. I remembered pulling to the shoulder, my hazard lights blinking useless semaphore, the desert turning into a room the sky had decided to enter. "I stood in front of the cab," I said, voice smaller than I liked, "between them and the door, like I could protect it." "You did," he said. "You were seen, and you were spared." Something hot pricked my eyes. It made no sense, none of it, but my body remembered. My left hand rose, unbidden, to the place behind my right ear, where a tiny crescent scar hides under hair. I'd cut myself working a strap, I always said, a careless nick that never fully faded. He glanced, not at the scar, but through it. "They asked to take the memory," he said. "It was kinder. But they left you a seam, a joining place, so it could be opened when it mattered." I laughed then, ugly and choking. "This is insane. You expect me to believe I saved, what? One of your friends, and then a committee of light voted to edit my brain?" He finally turned, and his eyes were terrible and beautiful. Those thin pupils floating in pale iris, catching my reflection like a coin in a fountain. "I don't expect belief, I expect recognition." Images tripped over each other. The heat of the steering wheel under desert stars, the weight, impossible and light, of that fragile body in my jacket. A smell like rain hitting a hot skillet. A chord of sound that bent the night into a bowl. A hand, mine, held out. A hand, other, answering. "If that happened," I said, softer, "why come back now? Why me?" "You kept your fear on a leash," he said. "Very few do, and because debts travel better than maps." Something shifted in the blue beyond the glass, a slow ripple, as if the light itself were breathing. The hum climbed half a note. The dash, which had been frozen, flickered. For an instant, every needle wavered and settled again. The clock still read 12:17, but the second I watched it tick to 18 and then, as if ashamed, fall back. I thought of all the nights I'd driven my life into shape by sheer momentum, all the exits I'd missed, all the stations I'd tuned past. I thought of my ex-wife telling me I loved the road more than home, and how I'd answered that the road was the only home that stayed where you left it. The truth of that curdled now. The road had moved, or I had. He reached into his torn shirt and brought out a small object cupped as gently as a man holds a moth. He opened his hand. A stone lay there, no bigger than a quarter, milky blue, lit from within like ice with a secret. I knew it before I knew it. "You left this in my cab," I said, throat tight, 40 years ago. "I'm returning what you kept," he said, "and taking back what you lost." Before I could ask what that meant, the blue outside condensed. The hum became music, structured and full. Harmonies nested inside harmonies. Shapes appeared at the edge of sight, ovals drifting deliberate. "Hold on, Jack," he said almost kindly. "It's time to remember the rest." The light gathered like weather, not like a beam. More a front rolling in without wind, a tide arriving on dry land. One second the cab was a box in the dark, the next it was an aquarium and we were the slow fish inside it. The hum became a braid of tones, and every note hooked into some nerve I didn't know I had, tugging memory into shape. I looked at the clock again, out of stubborn habit. 12:17. Then I watched the colon between the numbers blink, hold, blink, and freeze. The colon stayed bright, like it had remembered its job, and then forgotten how to finish it. I turned to the window and saw the world freeze with it. The tumbleweed half lifted from the shoulder stayed half lifted, every twig suspended in a posture of surprise. Grit hung in the air like sequins. Even the tiny moth I hadn't noticed before, wings mid-beat just above the dashboard, held a posture of flying without the sin of motion. The only thing still moving was the light, pouring itself in slow, deliberate folds, through seams that weren't there a moment ago. "Don't be afraid," he said again. He didn't say it like comfort. He said it like instruction. "I'm busy," I muttered, because humor is an old reflex and mine was fighting not to die. My breath smoked a little in the glow, even though the cab wasn't cold. It felt like the first morning inside a walk-in freezer after you've been sweating. Your skin says winter, your bones say July. Shapes resolved in the light, oval forms, silent, as if sound were a habit they'd given up. They weren't ships like the movies promised, no rivets, no seams, just smooth geometry, each one a drop of mercury deciding to hold still. One hovered beyond the guardrail, not 10 yards from the cab. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt the bewildered solemnity I've only known at funerals and births. The man beside me, my passenger, my judge, my proof, turned his head. In the glow, his irises thinned and widened like shutters, and for the first time, I saw a second ring beyond the first, a pale halo that caught and held the blue the way a shallow lake holds sky. He touched the dash, not with fingers exactly, but with attention. Every gauge quivered and went soft, as if the panel were made of water. "Jack," he said, and something in my name chimed from the glass. "Step out of the cab." I tried the handle, expecting weight and resistance. The door opened as if it had been wanting this. The outside was not outside anymore. It was inside the light. I stepped down, boots landing on gravel that felt less like rock than like memory of rock. The air hummed through my boots and up my legs. I could feel the song in the cartilage of my knees. Everything was still. The wind held its breath. My hazard lights were frozen mid-blink, one amber eye open, the other not yet closed. I walked around the nose of the Peterbilt and faced the oval hovering above the ditch. It was maybe the size of a school bus, though size felt like an uncooperative idea. Surface like liquid metal, but it never dripped. Close, I could see faint hexagonal patterns move under the skin, as if the thing had a slow heartbeat. The stranger joined me on the shoulder. He didn't cast much of a shadow, or maybe the light refused to admit that anything could interrupt it. For a long moment, we just stood there, two figures in a blue museum, where the exhibit title read, "A Night When Time Forgot to Move." "Why me?" I asked, the question finally landing with the weight it deserved. He looked at the craft, not at me. "Because you already said yes once." Memory flipped, and I was 21. A different highway, a different blue. I remembered standing between my cab and a smaller oval half hidden by sage, arms out without meaning to, a gesture as old as any prayer. I remembered fear leashed, not banished. I remembered the sensation of being measured and not found wanting. "You took it," I said, touching the small crescent scar behind my ear. "The memory." "We set it aside," he corrected. "Memory is a room with doors. We locked one. You carried the key in your blood and in the way you choose." The oval drifted closer, so smooth my eyes doubted the movement until the guardrail reflected a new angle of blue. Something like a doorway rose from the hull, not opening exactly, but agreeing. The air stepped back, the hum braided tighter. "Come," he said. I don't know why my feet obeyed. Maybe because my life up to that minute was a chain of small obediences. To the road, the logbook, the next town's coffee. And this one felt like the first honest command. I stepped off the shoulder down into the ditch. Gravel made no sound. My breath did not fog now. It threaded away in thin, luminous threads that rose and dissolved. At the threshold, the blue thickened, not as a wall, but as a question. He touched my shoulder, warm, shocking, human enough, and the question parted. The interior wasn't a room so much as a held idea of spaciousness. No edges to name, only gradients. My chest loosened. The hum shifted key. I felt tears in my eyes without the shame I usually reserve for them. "Jack," he said again, almost fond, "when time resumes, you will stand where we leave you. You will drive away. You will be told what you need and spared what you don't. This is not erasure. This is alignment." "What are you?" I asked. His answer landed not in my ears, but somewhere behind them, where the scar hummed faintly like a tuning fork. "We are travelers who learn to be neighbors. We are the long answer to a question your species keeps asking." "About God?" I tried, because the blue felt holy, and I am an old man with old words. "About home," the answer came, "and how far it will go to find you." The light folded once, twice, like a breath drawn in before speech, and the world tilted gently, as if a great hand had adjusted the horizon. Somewhere outside, beyond the frozen moth and the suspended grit and the stalled colon on my clock, time stood ready like a runner at the line. "Hold on," he said softly, and I did. Not to the rail or the doorframe, but to the seam of memory he was reopening, the door I was about to walk through for the second time. The light didn't blind, it translated. Stepping through that threshold felt like walking into a sound you've known since childhood, but never had a name for. The room had no corners, only gradients of brightness that deepened as you looked, like staring into a shallow river and suddenly noticing the canyon beneath. My boots touched no floor I could see, but the pressure answered back, gentle and sure, the way a good porch does under a tired man. He moved ahead of me, not so much walking as being expected by the space. Where he went, structures coalesced, threads of pale geometry that braided and unbraided into patterns my eyes wanted to call machinery before giving up and calling them mercy. The hum I'd been hearing took on harmonies. I felt chords at the hinge of my jaw, in the notch of my collarbone, along the old scar behind my ear. Everything about me that made me was being tuned. "You asked what I am," he said, and his voice had a warmth it hadn't held outside. "It will be simpler to show you what I was." The light thickened in front of us and became a picture, not flat, more like a window in clear water. I saw a ditch choked with sage, a small broken craft the color of rain on metal, a boy who was not a boy fighting to crawl free. Its limbs were too thin, its eyes were too large, shining with a pain that didn't know how to scream. The night smelled of burned dust and hot wiring, and then I saw me, 21, all elbows and intention, drop into that ditch like the world had hung a sign that read, "Help here." I watched myself shrug off my jacket, wrap the trembling body, whisper nonsense meant for a dog or a child or a man in shock. "Easy, easy. I got you. Breathe." I watched my hands shake. I watched the small being reach for the thermos cap and hold it to its ear, listening to the slosh as if it were music. And then the orbs came, quiet, deliberate, spreading blue across the brush. I remembered standing between them and the cab door because I was watching myself do it. Every instinct said run. Something older said stay. The orbs slowed, as if considering the shape of a choice. A high, braided tone filled the air. And then, this part had always been mud in my mind. They saw me. Me, as in the story of me. Where I'd been, where fear lived, where kindness did. The picture blurred, not because it faded, but because I was crying. The dumb, grateful tears of a man seeing proof of the best thing he's ever done. The window thinned and was only light again. He spoke softly. "I was carried from the ditch you made a sanctuary. I was healed. I learned words. One of them was debt. You were the one, I said, breath hitching. You were the small one, he finished, not unkindly. I became this by the long road. We do not grow older as you do. We grow toward clarity, but we remember the doors that opened for us. I rubbed my palms on my jeans, grounding myself in denim and oil and the familiar stink of a man who's worked his whole life. You came back to say thank you? He tilted his head as if translating gratitude into dialect. Yes and no. There was a bend in your line that we caused. We froze time on that first night to carry me away. Your mind met more sky than it was built to hold. To keep you whole, we set a door in the place of a wound and locked it. That lock carried a price, a drift in your choices, an undertow in your hours. You called it restlessness. We called it a debt. A shiver ran the length of me. I thought of the way I'd chased miles like they were absolution. I thought of a kitchen table where a woman once waited and then didn't. I thought of all the exits I'd passed because staying felt like suffocating and leaving felt like relief without reason. So you're here to fix me, I asked, and heard how small the word sounded in that vast, patient room. To align what we bent, he said, to return what we took. You kept this. He opened his hand, and the coin-sized stone lay there again, milk blue, lit from within, and we kept that. He touched 2 fingers to the scar behind my ear. I promised we would set it right when you were ready. And am I? Tonight you stopped again, he said simply, in the middle of a country that tells men to keep moving. You said yes to the unknown a second time. That is readiness. The light around us changed key, like a choir taking breath together. Lines of geometry spiraled into a shape that hovered between us. Neither diagram nor map, but something my bones recognized. I understood without knowing how. This was my road. Not the highways I'd driven, but the choices I'd made and the ones I'd flinched from. Some paths glowed hot, some dimmed to ash. In the center was a small, bright seam, the locked door. He looked at me the way a good surgeon looks at a hand he's about to mend. Say yes, he said, and the door opens. Say no, and you return with your seam intact and your drift unchanged. Both are permitted. I thought about fear on a leash. I thought about the first night, when I had stood in front of something I didn't understand and chosen not to run. I thought about the way the desert breathed, and the way that breath had lived under my ribs ever since. I was 58. The road behind me was longer than the road ahead. If there was a chance to lay something down that I'd been carrying without a name, I wasn't going to die with it still in my hands. Yes, I said. The word was small. The room made it huge. The seam behind my ear sang, a single pure note that slid open like a latch lifting. Heat flashed across my scalp, then poured down my spine in a cool ribbon. The light brightened without glare. I staggered. He caught my elbow with a grip that was exactly human, warm, firm, present. For a breath, I was both men at once. The 21-year-old in the ditch, the 58-year-old in the ship. The same kindness linked them, like a bridge built across decades by one quiet choice. The ache I'd called restlessness loosened, and beneath it I found something that felt suspiciously like peace. The harmonies softened. The shape of my road faded back into brightness. He closed his hand over the blue stone and then pressed it into mine. This is yours, he said. Proof for the days you will need proof. And you? I asked. He glanced toward a deeper brightness I understood now as direction, not distance. I'm going home, he said, but I will not be far. The room dimmed to a tone, the tone thinned to a hum. The hum threaded back into the world. The threshold opened behind us like a curtain drawn by a careful hand. When time resumes, he said gently, don't mistake it for the same time you left. I stepped toward the gap. The stone cool and real in my palm, the seam behind my ear warm and open, and for the first time in 40 years, the night felt like it belonged to me. Coming back was like surfacing from deep water. The pressure let go by slow degrees. Sound returned one layer at a time. The hum threaded itself back into the engine's growl. The blue thinned to night. The cab settled around me with the gentle thud of the world taking its place. The first thing I saw was the dash clock, 12:17. The colon blinked once, timid, apologetic. Then the digits rolled to 12:18 like nothing unusual had happened. The moth above the dash finished its frozen wing beat and flew. Outside, my hazards completed their interrupted blink. Wind remembered it had business with the sage and got back to work. He was gone. Passenger seat empty. No door slam, no goodbye. The way a thought leaves when it's done being needed. For a second, I sat very still, hands hovering over the wheel like I'd just been given it as a gift. The skin behind my right ear was warm, pleasantly sore, the way a stiff joint feels after it's finally moved. I looked down at my palm. The blue stone lay there, coin-sized, cool as a drop of midnight. Its light didn't throw shadows, it made them behave. Proof, he'd called it. Proof weighs more than it looks. I put the rig in gear. The Peterbilt took the cue like a horse happy to be pointed home. The engine note was familiar and somehow sweeter, as if a buzzing I'd never noticed had stopped. The GPS woke and came back with a sulky no signal, then decided it was a team player after all and snapped to a map. For a heartbeat, my position arrow smeared into a streak like a comet breadcrumb and then settled over the highway where it belonged. The odometer ticked forward. The fuel gauge hadn't moved. I drove. The desert had the good grace not to explain itself. 20 minutes later, the lights of Vaughan lifted out of the dark. Gas, a motel that pretended it wasn't a motel. A diner with an EAT sign older than my first divorce. I pulled the rig into the far lot, killed the engine, and sat with the sudden silence. No hum under the hum. Just me, the clock now being dutiful at 12:41, and a stone in my hand that could have been a dream if it didn't press so convincingly into skin. I pocketed it and climbed down. Gravel made real sounds. My boots counted them. Inside the diner, the air was all coffee and fryer oil and last chance pie. Night folks, a table of ranch hands bent over eggs like secrets, an old couple sharing onion rings without hurry, a waitress who had been doing the Lord's work since Elvis was a rumor. The bell over the door announced me because it announces everyone. Normalcy is loud when you've been somewhere it doesn't know. Kitchen's pretending it's closing, the waitress said, pen tucked behind her ear. But if you look at me with those trucker eyes, pancakes happen. Coffee, I said, voice finding its way back, and whatever's still warm. She topped a mug until it nearly overflowed. Clock's busted, she added, motioning with her chin to a plastic wall clock that said 11:03. Been stuck since... She glanced at her phone. 11:18. Phone says 12:51. Can't trust anything electric tonight. A line of cold ran under my shirt, not unpleasant. You got a radio back there? I asked. She nodded. Kitchen listens to some ranch station, went all wails and space noises around midnight. Spooked the dishwasher so bad he started stacking plates with the bowls. Space noises, I repeated, which is not something I thought I'd say over coffee at a counter. She shrugged, in the way of people who have made peace with the world being stranger than it needs to be. You out on 285? Heard folks saw lights. Just me and the road, I said. It was the truth. It wasn't the whole truth. I watched the coffee surface shiver and settle. The first sip tasted like a promise kept. I paid in cash. The receipt printer stuttered, spit out a blank, then another with the right numbers and no time stamp. When she slid it over, her phone buzzed with a weather alert. No weather, just a glitch. System test displayed 3 times, then cleared. Outside, my rig sat under the lot lamps. Paint catching yellow, the way it's caught 1,000 times. I had the urge to circle it, check seals and straps and tires, as if something metaphysical might loosen a lug nut. The rational mind looks for physical failures when it can't name spiritual ones. Back in the cab, I set the coffee in its ring, turned the key, and watched the needles rise with a new affection I hadn't known a dashboard could deserve. The radio, uninvited, rose out of static with a faint tone. The wineglass sing I'd heard before, then steadied into late-night weather from Albuquerque. The newsreader mentioned a brief regional power irregularity around midnight. No details. A caller with a voice like cigarettes and regret swore the moon had blinked. I drove on. My phone, charging stubborn in its cradle, came to life and showed a missed call from a number I didn't know. The voicemail icon blinked. I pressed play. Static. Then a soft, metallic voice. "Thank you for not being afraid." I nearly steered us onto the rumble strip. "Okay," I said aloud, to the road, to the stone, to no one. "Okay. What do you do when the impossible has the courtesy to leave breadcrumbs? You pick them up, you test them gently with your teeth, you see if you can live with their taste." I ran a hand behind my ear. The skin there was tender, a warmth that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. Not painful, just present. The restlessness, the undertow that had always tugged at my hours, was quiet. Not gone, but like a dog sleeping with one eye open, content for the moment to let the house be. At the next pullout, I braked and climbed down to the shoulder. The sky was huge and shameless, stars so thick you could scoop them. I held the stone up, and for a breath, the light from within met the light from above, and agreed on something I couldn't hear. Then it was just a stone again, cooling the sweat of my palm. Headlights swept my back. A truck I didn't recognize eased by, its driver lifting 2 fingers off the wheel in the way we say hello and goodbye, and "I see you." I lifted mine in answer. The world hadn't ended. It had widened. When I got back behind the wheel, my GPS chirped and drew a neat line from Vaughan to where I sat, and a blank, perfectly straight gap behind that, like a censored sentence. I took a photo, because men who've seen ghosts still trust pictures more than stories. I rolled on toward the state line. Somewhere past Encino, the radio bled into a song I hadn't heard since I was 21, an old road hymn that had gotten me through a winter haul that felt like a lifetime. I sang the chorus out of tune because no one was there to be spared it. Proof would come, I told myself, or it wouldn't. Either way, the seam was open, and the road felt new without being young. The blue light lived under my ribs like a small, steady lantern. And for the first time in 4 decades of driving, I wasn't chasing miles. I was going somewhere. I didn't know yet that the next breadcrumb would be fire. I didn't plan to show anyone the stone. I told myself I'd keep it in my pocket, like a saint keeps a relic. Touch it when the road went long, let it anchor me to the part of the night that had made me whole. But proof is a restless animal. It paces in the pocket, it knocks from the inside of your palm. 2 days later, I rolled into Albuquerque with a light load and hours to spare. I found myself turning off at a university exit I hadn't used in years. It wasn't a decision so much as a tide. I followed it. A geology building with a concrete face and sleepy windows took me in. I told a half-truth at the front desk. Lost mineral sample, family keepsake, curious if it's anything. And a grad student with hair like static led me to a back room full of equipment that looked expensive enough to make a man careful with his elbows. "Won't take long," he said, cheerful in the way of people who haven't yet learned to be suspicious of the extraordinary. He slid the stone under a scope, adjusted a dial, frowned, adjusted again. "Huh." I stood with my hands on my hips because pockets felt incriminating. "What's huh mean?" "Glass would scatter this way," he said. "But this isn't glass, and I'm not seeing lattice I recognize." He tried another scope, another light. "Do you mind if I run a quick XRF? It's non-destructive." "Non-destructive sounds like my love language," I said, and he laughed without looking up. While he lined things up, I became aware of a sound, a faint high thread that reminded me of the wine-glass note on the radio. It vibrated somewhere in my jaw, then in the hinge behind my right ear, where the seam lived warm and quiet. The grad student didn't flinch. Maybe he couldn't hear it. Maybe it was only for me. He pressed a few buttons. The machine hummed, then stuttered like it had tried a word it didn't know. The monitor spat a forest of spikes with labels that meant nothing to me, then flattened into a blank, sulky line. The fluorescence overhead flickered once, twice. The sound in my bones climbed half a note. "Okay," he said slowly. "That's unusual." He tapped keys. "Let me just save this spectrum and—" The computer froze. The cursor crystallized into a little spinning clock that might as well have been a middle finger. He made the universal technician sound, half sigh, half prayer, and reached for his phone to take a photo of the screen just in case. The phone camera app opened to static like an old TV with no channel. He blinked, tried again. Same. "Sometimes the lab gremlins wake up," he said, smiling to keep me calm. "Give me a sec. We'll reboot the interface." The smell reached me before anything else did. Hot dust, paper, the sudden metallic tang of a transformer deciding it had opinions. The high thread in my ear tightened. Somewhere down the hall an alarm chirped, undecided and then insistent. "Is that us?" he asked. We stepped into the corridor. A thin ribbon of smoke unspooled from a light fixture 3 doors down like a magician's trick. It wasn't panic yet, just confusion walking fast. A faculty member in a sweater vest cursed softly and pulled a fire alarm that yelped as if surprised at its own voice. Doorways opened. Students poured out, blinking, holding laptops like babies. Back in the lab, the monitor went black with a little fiefed. The XRF machine sighed into silence. I lifted the stone from the tray, and it was colder than it had any reason to be, like it had spent the last minute at the bottom of a lake no one had mapped. "Sir, we should evacuate," the grad student said, voice brisk now. "We'll save the session logs after—" There would be no session logs. I knew it the way a man knows a coming jackknife, by the twitch in the trailer before the math catches up. Proof had drawn breath. Proof had decided it would not live in a folder. We followed the herd outside. Fire trucks arrived with practiced grace. A security golf cart tried to look authoritative and mostly succeeded. While we stood on the lawn, blinking sun into our eyes, I glanced at the building's windows. In one of them, my room, I thought I saw the monitor flicker blue and then darken. A trick of light, maybe. Or not. "Can you leave your contact?" the grad student asked, cautious now, professional. "In case we, get the data back." I wrote J. Coleman and a number on a clipboard that had already collected 6 variations of "We tried." When he turned away, I slid the stone deeper into my pocket and felt ridiculous and relieved in equal measure. I was not ready to have it taken. I was not ready to have it explained. Back at the truck, the cab felt intimate in the way church pews sometimes do on a weekday. I started the engine. The radio woke itself to static, then folded smoothly into AM weather for the valley. I was about to pull out when a grey sedan eased into the lot and parked 2 rows over. Nothing notable, state plates, rental car anonymous. 2 men in windbreakers got out, not cops, not campus. They stood with their hands behind their backs like ushers at a funeral, looking at the building, then at the people, then, very briefly, at me. Maybe I've watched too many movies. Maybe I'm the kind of man who sees shapes in dust. But the seam behind my ear warmed, and I heard a soft chime from the radio that wasn't part of any broadcast. My GPS drew a little circle around my truck icon, and then, cheeky, erased it. "All right," I told the wheel, the road, the lantern under my ribs. Message received. I took a geometry of turns no one would call suspicious unless they were very bored. Out of the lot, past the stadium, onto a frontage road, onto I-25 South. The sedan didn't follow. or if it did not choose to be seen. On the open interstate, the phenomena that had been occasional became personal. Traffic cams in overhead gantries glitched to black as I passed beneath, then returned to regular programming behind me. Twice, highway advisory signs stuttered mid-message and scrolled a line of gibberish that almost formed words. Isho, oh, me. My dashboard clock kept time like a reformed sinner. My wristwatch refused to tick unless I tapped the face and asked nicely. Night fell clean as a page turned. Outside Socorro, my CB hissed alive, though I hadn't touched it in months. A voice I did not know said, "Mile marker 143, eyes up." And then a single note rang, pure, silver, and cut. At MM 143, a pallet of cinder blocks lay shattered across the right lane, fresh from some careless tie-down. I eased left and glided by. Behind me, brake lights bloomed red as spilled paint. I laughed once, shaky and thankful. Then I cried a little, because men my age cry easier than we admit, and the night was kind about it. By dawn, I decided two things. First, the stone was going nowhere I couldn't see it. Second, whatever had opened behind my ear had opened in front of me too. The world hadn't turned magical, it had turned honest. Signals meant things. The wrong hums were warning labels, the right ones were blessings. If I paid attention, I'd be kept. If I didn't, I'd be corrected. I took a photo of the sunrise through the bug-splattered windshield. The picture saved with a timestamp exactly 1 minute off from my phone's clock, which was exactly 1 minute off from the dash. I didn't fix any of them. Let them disagree. Truth had room now. And somewhere behind me, in a concrete building that would smell of damp insulation for weeks, a folder on a dead computer held a spectrum of a stone that would not be named. Soon enough there would be a voicemail, another thank you, a final breadcrumb, but not yet. First, there would be the fire everyone could see. Southbound at dusk, New Mexico laid itself flat and endless, a sheet of copper cooling under a lavender sky. The road felt newly mine, not easier, just honest. When the seam behind my ear pulsed, I'd listen. When the air went still in that particular way, I'd slow. Past truth or consequences, the CB hissed open on its own and carried a single pure note, then 3 words in a voice that sounded like it had traveled a long way to find me. Truck stop, now. I don't argue with mercy anymore. I took the exit. It was one of those all-in-one places, fuel, showers, a chrome and vinyl diner, a little store that could outfit a life on the road. A breeze pushed the scent of diesel and hot brake pads across the lot. I swung wide to the far island, killed the engine, and felt the seam warm once, twice, like a heartbeat sharing the load. At first I didn't see the danger. Then I heard it. A high, wrong whine under the normal clatter. Across the lot, a reefer trailer idled beside the curb, its compressor rattling. The sound sharpened to a thin, metallic scream. Blue-white arcs flickered inside the vent louvers, electrical, hungry. The driver was nowhere in sight. "Hey!" I yelled to a pair of kids walking a terrier past the pumps. "Back it up!" They froze, looked at me, looked at the trailer. Then the seam in my ear chimed, clear as a bell, and my body took over before thought could argue. I hit my air horn in 3 long blasts. Heads turned. I grabbed the nearest emergency stop and slapped it. The diesel pumps thunked into silence. "Kill power!" Someone shouted from the shop bay. A man in coveralls sprinted toward a breaker panel. I ran for the reefer, my boots printing urgency in gravel. The first pop was small, a thrown wrench of a sound. The second was a punch. The compressor vent spat flame, a brief blue tongue, and then the whole unit coughed and exhaled fire. Glass screamed as heat found it. A hot, metallic stink bloomed. "Clear it! Clear it!" A woman in a company polo waved her arms, her voice sharp with training and fear. Drivers abandoned fuel nozzles and ran. The kids with the terrier bolted for the diner, dog tucked like a football. Somewhere a phone called 911 and got busy. I reached the reefer's cab, through the door and leaned on the horn. No answer. Keys gone. The steering wheel was cold and useless under my hands. I pounded the sleeper panel and yelled, "Driver, out!" Silence. Then the world changed key. You could see it. Everyone could. The air went heavy shiny like heat mirage made of light. A thin blue veil rippled over the burning unit without touching it, the way a hand hovers over a fevered forehead. For a heartbeat, sound fell away, except the seam's note behind my ear, bright and clean, and the wrong whine from the dying compressor. Clocks, plural, paused. The big digital over the cashier, the pump readouts, the diner's ancient neon wall clock at 6:12. A woman holding her phone out to film gasped. On her screen, the fire hung like a photograph, while a translucent wash of blue slid across it like tide. Time restarted with a small shove. The flame dropped half a foot, as if someone had taken a bite out of it. Then the reefer died, clean, abrupt, like a singer who found the note, held it, and decided to be done. Smoke rose in a white column that refused, for a few odd seconds, to drift. Then the breeze remembered its job and carried it politely toward the highway. Sirens approached, professional and late in the best way. People spoke at once. The kids cried, the relieved kind. The woman in the polo put her hands on her knees and laughed a laugh that got the shakes out. "You see that?" a driver said, eyes wide enough to hold two skies. "You see that blue?" "I got it," the phone woman said, stunned and pleased and a little afraid. "I got all of it. I stood there with my palms open to the night and felt the seam behind my ear settle from hot to warm to simply there. In my pocket, the stone was a cool coin of midnight. Proof doesn't always knock. Sometimes it nods at a crowd and lets them carry the story. The fire department did what fire departments do: foam, check, report, caution tape. A deputy with a mustache that had seen some things took down statements with a patience born of overtime. "You hit the emergency stop?" he asked. "I did," I said. "And you leaned on your horn?" "I did." "And you saw what?" I looked at his eyes, the lines at their corners, the way his pen paused over the form. The truth felt simple. "A blue light," I said. "Everyone did." He held my gaze a second longer than habit, then wrote blue light like any other fact. Copy. By then, the phones had started to dance across the internet. 10 angles, clocks in frame, all showing the same stuck minute. The diner's neon clock posted to a local group with the caption, "Time froze, fire shrank, we're okay." The store camera's feed caught the blue veil in a perfect sweep. For once, I wouldn't be the man at the counter telling a story you had to be kind to believe. Strangers would do the believing for me. Back in my cab, doors shut, the world quieted to the good sounds again. The radio clicked and found the same late-night weather that had become a lullaby. A voicemail icon blinked. Unknown number. I pressed play, static. Then the voice I knew, metallic, soft, and nearer than distance should allow. Debt settled, drift returned. Keep the light. The message ended with a tiny chime that made the seam hum like a plucked string, and then rest. I took the stone out and set it on the dash, where coins and pens have a habit of going to die. It glowed very gently in the dim cab, just enough to let the plastic and chrome admit they were beautiful in their way. Outside, the lot buzzed with the happy exhaustion of disaster dodged. Someone started the rumor that a transformer hiccuped. Someone else said solar flares. Everyone agreed the blue was real. I drove out under a sky so full of stars, it felt ridiculous to pretend the universe was empty. The restlessness that had always lived under my ribs lay down like a dog at my feet. I thought of the boy who wasn't a boy in my jacket, of the oval ship, of the patient room where memory had a shape. I thought of the word home and how small I'd made it. The highway took me the way it always has, shoulders, signs, center lines singing under the tires, and for the first time I understood that the point had never been miles. It had been the stopping. The saying yes, the way the night itself will ask for your hand, and if you offer it, lead you across. Somewhere behind me, a dozen videos rendered, uploaded, shared. Somewhere above me, a light moved that no one would notice unless they were looking. I touched the scar behind my ear, felt the quiet there, and laughed once, softly, at my old, faithful, stubborn heart. I didn't swear he was an alien anymore. I swore he was a neighbor, and I swore that when the road asked again, I'd stop.